6 million Jewish people were killed. 1.1 million children were murdered. One man was all it took to come to power and try and destruct an entire nation. Over the 6 Shoah years that the Nazis took control of Eastern Europe, from 1939 to 1945, these 6 million Jews that died made up 2/3 of all Jews living in Europe at that time. My name is Johnny Seifert. In this documentary, you will hear what happened to the Jewish people, from being in ghettos to being sent to concentration camps. Also, you will hear from various survivors who will tell their testimonials of what life was like at Auschwitz concentration camp.
They draw out her blood, injected her with petrol. It seems unbelievable to you.
I did nothing. How can a boy of 12 hope people should die? So he'll have more room to sit down.
I knew just from hearing those stories that I needed to go to Poland, but I did not think I was strong enough to go alone. After talking with my friends Leron, Leanne and Amy, we decided that we would go to Poland and support each other. I did not feel that I had enough information on the Holocaust to understand what I'd be seeing, and so I met with Auschwitz survivor Zigi Shipper to find out about his story and how he was captured by the Nazis before being taken to Auschwitz concentration camp.
I was born in Poland in a city called Lodz, which is the second largest city in Poland. There were about 265,000 Jews. One morning while I was still in bed, my father came to me and he said, there's going to be a war on Germany. It's going to invade Poland. I didn't even know what he was talking about, 9 years old. What do you know about wars? And he said he's got to run away because especially the Jewish young people will be the first ones to suffer under the Germans if they occupy the whole of Poland.
Holocaust survivor Freddie Knoller describes what happened when the Nazis came to his house for the first time.
We knew that my father had to complete a declaration to tell the Nazis immediately his financial position. Knew how much money he was earning as an accountant, and he had to complete a form telling immediately how much money, how rich or how poor each Jewish family was. Harassment against the Jews started. I remember they took Jews from the street to clean the pavement of the street. They had anti-Semitic exhibition and to teach the population anti-Semitism.
My name is Rabbi Dov Cowan, and I'm a rabbi at the Jewish Learning Exchange. At the Wannsee Conference in January 1942, the Nazi leadership decided that it was time for a final solution for the Jewish problem in Europe. Death camps were set up in places like Auschwitz, Belzec, Sobibor and Treblinka with one purpose: to bring in as many Jews as possible, to kill them, and then get rid of the bodies. It was June 1942 in Tarnów. In a forest off a normal residential road, 10,000 Jewish people were killed there by Amos Gertz, the Plaszow butcher. Leanne was by my side as we entered the mass grave.
We walked through a park, and at first it seemed quite pretty and very quiet, and it was just very nice. And then you realised where you actually were.
The forest had a sign that said,
"Beware of the wild animals." That was referring to us, the Jewish people.
The mass graves had blue fences around them, the size of a football pitch.
There were lots of other Jewish groups there singing Jewish songs and all comforting each other, and I couldn't hold back the tears.
Standing at the mass grave brought out so many emotions for different people. On my left, I had Leanne nearly crying. And on my right, I had Leron and Amy, who had different emotions. And they noticed things that I didn't notice.
There were hundreds of Israeli students all singing and united as one. For me, I was like bemused of the situation.
There was this kind of sense of everyone kind of mourning for the same thing, but also it unified us together. I didn't know who these people were, but they were hugging and crying, and it was very moving, but also very kind of unifying at the same time.
The mass grave that we were looking at had 800 children buried in. These 800 children were brought in potato sacks alive. They were poured into this ditch and crushed. Another potato sack full of kids arrived. They were poured on top of those dead bodies until 800 children were crushed into this ditch. When I was standing holding that blue front, I decided to light a yahrzeit candle. We could not believe that this had happened. Although we stood together, we all had different emotions.
And it just was horrible. It was like sickening how people could do that without any emotion, and they couldn't feel any guilt or show any feelings. I find that really hard to comprehend.
And I remember seeing all these, there were children's toys that had been put in the graves, candles, pictures. It was really moving. Everyone was very quiet because, you know, what can you really say when you're thinking about young children having been brutally murdered at exactly where we were standing?
I saw a young boy, aged about 4 or 5, in striped pyjamas. As I was walking past, this picture caught my eye. I stopped and stared at it. And for someone to be so vulnerable and victimised, it's distressing as well as emotional. I wrote a letter to my grandparents, brought out all my emotions, all my feelings I've had to them, which I may have never expressed. For me, putting this all down on paper really brought up emotions. It made me feel an emotional connection to the Jewish people as well as my family, and I'll never forget them.
We take it for granted. Mum and Dad, I love you. I really do. Mass graves and concentration camps weren't just where Jewish people were sent to. Death camps such as in Belzec and Treblinka were set up. Cattle carts would take them there. But the Jews knew where they were going. Treblinka wasn't a holiday home. Auschwitz, on the other hand, could have been seen as somewhere where they're going to be free. The Jews knew nothing. As the Jews were on the cattle carts on the way to Treblinka, everyone was crying their eyes out, weeping. However, Rabbi Azriel David Fastag, an elderly Jew, wrapped up in his rags clothing, his face white as snow. He wasn't crying. He stopped what he was doing, looked around him, and started singing. Ani ma'amim, be'emunah shlema biyat HaMoshiach, v'af al pi sheyishmaya im kol zeh akaheh lo b'chol yom sheyavo. I believe with perfect faith in the coming of the Mashiach, and even though he may tarry, nevertheless I wait each day for his coming. Closing his eyes, he sung. And he sung. And there was silence on the cattle cart suddenly. Hundreds of ears were listening attentively in amazement. He didn't hear the voices at first, but suddenly he found that other people were joining in. Ani ma'amin be'emunah shlema biyat HaMoshiach v'yaf al pi shlema shaya im kol zeh akah lo b'chol yom sheyavo. Singing and singing, louder and louder and louder. When Ziggy told me about his journey, I'll never forget about a thought that went through his head.
When we came to the railway station, first thing I said to my grandmother, you know, I can't see any trains. She said, they're standing in front of you. I said, but they're cattle trucks. She says, that's all there is. And you know, they opened those shutters and they packed us in. There was no way you could sit down. You know, there was no room. I always had a problem. I could never tell people why. I did nothing. How can a boy of 12 hope people should die so he'll have more room to sit down? Every morning they used to open the shutters and take out dead bodies. So after 3 or 4 days we had room to sit down.
Freddie Knoller describes to me what happened to him when he entered Auschwitz-Belsen camp.
The doors opened up, SS in uniform and a loudspeaker on. You are here in Auschwitz concentration camp. We want young men who can march for 15 minutes to go to the camp. And we walked to the camp and we saw a big sign there, entrance to the camp. Arbeit macht frei, work gives you freedom. music. We heard music. We saw old prisoners playing in an orchestra there, march, and we had to march in the rhythm of that music, and all these prisoners in their striped pajamas. We were taken to a barrack. We had to undress. They gave us our uniform on. We were taken to another block. There, old prisoners came with shears, cut all our hair off, and then we were taken to another block where the Germans asked us questions about our family, the addresses where we live, and the brothers or sisters, with any of their family names and addresses.
I walked through the gates of Auschwitz-Birkenau with my friends Leanne and Liron. None of us could believe what we were seeing. The Nazis set up wooden barracks in Auschwitz to hold 250 people. However, they ended up holding 1,500 people.
There was three, one on the ground floor, one in the middle, and one on the top.
There was 3 rows. The top were most humid and most cold in winter. The middles were the most vulnerable to getting hit, and the bottom were most vulnerable to excretion, as well as being kicked by the SS officers. So nowhere was safe.
But we had to sleep with one head was on one end of the bunk, and the other one had his head on the other end, so that the feet were more or less next to my head.
There were about 800 people there, and there was no blankets, no cushions, nothing, straw.
When I got home from Poland, I got into my bed, 4 pillows behind me, and just laid there. It was the weirdest thing after what I had just witnessed in Auschwitz. I know Liron felt the same.
For me, sitting in bed again, having a double bed to myself, being warm, comfortable, safe, it makes something so hard to imagine.
And it wasn't a proper bed. You couldn't call it a bed. What we have today is just luxury compared to what they had.
The toilets in Auschwitz were horrific.
I've never ever seen anything like this. There was maybe 100 little circle bowls going along down the barrack.
66 seats in 2 rows directly diagonal to each other, so that each Jew was back to back with the next Jew in 3 blocks separated. The Jews were sent to go to the toilet together when the Nazis said that they could go. The waste went just below them, 5 foot down, which the Jews had to dig out. The people who did that were known as the Shyster Gang. The Shyster Gang wore hats. The hats were used to collect the human waste and then carry it off to the tanks outside. The Nazis made the Jews wear the hats as well, so that the human waste would go from head to toe. If they refused to wear it, they'd be shot. Even if they did wear it, they'd still be shot. Other Jews were drowning each other in the human waste so that they could have more room to sit down and have a little bit more food.
People would even sleep on human waste. It was just horrible.
Could you imagine being in that situation where for one single cracker you had to drown someone else? A child. A teenager. Auschwitz-Birkenau was split into 2. On one side we had the men's, and on the other side was the women's camp, which held 6,000 Jewish women. Holocaust survivor Gena Turgel describes to me what it was like when she used to wake up at Auschwitz-Birkenau.
5 o'clock in the morning, whistle, men separate and women separate. We were on one side, waiting for Commander Gerd to appear. Sometimes on a horse, a whip in one hand and a gun in the other, and he walked like an elephant. Bodyguards around him, walked over to our side, several lashes across our faces. Our cheeks were burning. And then he walked over to the men's side.
If you said you can't walk, they shot you.
You haven't shaved today, shot him down. You look too stupid, shot him. You shaved in the morning like that, you could have shot 50 to 70 people.
I couldn't believe that one man, Amont Gert, could do this to the Jewish people. When I was in Poland, I went to his house in Plaszów. There was a Lidl down the road. He lived in a normal area. Yet, behind his house was the Plaszów camp, where 10,000 Jewish people were killed. When I went into his house, I had this sick feeling. I can't really describe it. I just didn't want to touch anything. I was disgusted, and Being in his lounge, there was a fireplace and pictures on the wall, and it looked like a normal house, yet this guy was just killing Jews, and we were standing in his house. Together with my friends, we did Haftalah. It was so surreal and so weird. We had the Haftalah candle after Shabbat being lit, lighting up a whole room from a single candle. We're singing songs, singing louder and louder. We are so proud to be Jewish. Look what we can do. We can celebrate the ending of Shabbat and look to the new week. Standing in Amon Gert's house.
Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech
The conditions of the Jewish people in Auschwitz kept getting worse. The Nazis carried on torturing the Jewish people, starving them.
Tell you what the food was in Auschwitz. We, in the morning we got up, we got some black coffee and a slice of bread with a margarine on it. We went to work. At 12 o'clock, 12:30, we stopped work for half an hour. We were given a bowl of soup.
Water with a few vegetables swimming around. If you were lucky, sometimes the chap liked you that was giving out the soup, dug a bit deeper, and he could have found a piece of meat. It was horse meat, but we didn't care. You know, when you're hungry, you can eat anything. I would have eaten dog meat or rats or anything, as long as it was eatable.
And we received another bowl of soup. And that's all we had day in, day out.
And sending them to gas chambers to die in their thousands. Freddie Knoller talks about this horrifying period.
In Birkenau, they have gas chambers and crematorium, and there they've gassed them, killed them, and cremated them there.
The Nazis decided the best way was to create gas chambers in which hundreds of Jews would be herded in at one time into a big concrete room. Zyklon B chemical gas would be put into the room, and after just around 20 minutes, everyone inside would have suffocated to death.
I remember walking all the way back to the crematorium at the back of Auschwitz concentration camp. 5 crematoriums were set up with gas chambers inside it. The Nazis had ruined them and just left them as rubble. It's hard to believe that 38,000 Jews were killed there every single day.
The Germans destroyed it. It was literally crumbles of rocks. And I just walked past, just imagining how many people suffered, how many people died here. It's a place I'll never forget, and it's for the wrong reason.
Baruch Hashem, not all Auschwitz survivors died. Gena Turgel was one of the lucky ones, and she was inside that gas chamber. Gena tells me how she managed to survive.
We were segregated by Dr. Mengele. We were segregated to a shower room. Others went somewhere else.
And we saw chimneys, smoke coming out, and we said, oh, there must be bakeries. They do their own baking here. So we thought, well, at least we'll have enough to eat. They marched them to their showers, they told them. They packed them into their room. When it was full, completely packed, they closed the doors. A German SS guard went to the back of the building, climbed the ladder. There was a little opening there, threw some Zyklon B gas into that room. Within 20 minutes, all the people that were there were dead. Within 1 hour of arriving to Auschwitz-Birkenau, those people were dead.
So my mother, luckily with me together and so many women, and we walking towards that building. And that Mengele, he was most horrible man. And we had to leave our clothes behind, and there were no towels or soap. No. And we waited for the water. All of a sudden, a door opened. The one which we walked in, and walked in a woman, which I knew she was working as a clerk in a previous camp. And I was trying to push myself with so many women in front of me. And she looked around and she noticed me and she says, you are here, like that, and stretched her arms. And she rushed out. And I was rather disappointed I wasn't able to speak to her. And after a little while, water came through. And I was so relieved. You know, water wonderful that we drank it. It was ice cold water. But to us, you know, water came on our backs and we drank it. And then the water stopped. And the doors opened again. We walked out. And the women who worked there screamed, you are alive. We never thought we'd see you again. wonderful, embraced us and shouted. I looked around, I saw myself, what are they? Why are you shouting like that? What's the matter? They said, don't you know where you've been? I said, no, where? You were in the guest chamber. When I heard that, I completely, utterly lost my voice.
You will smell the sweet smell of the burning of flesh, and really quite soon we smelled in the air.
So many men, mainly, were taken into the cemetery to chop the tombstones because they have got to build barracks. And shall we say about half of them returned back because they've been tortured to that extent and they've been shot there and there. It was most every day there were lots of fathers, sons, brothers, husbands. Then we had to carry wood for the bodies to be burned because the Germans didn't want to leave any trace.
They only had one hospital, which was Mengele, doing operations on babies and things like that, throwing babies into ice-cold water, seeing how long they'll survive.
They draw out her blood, injected her with petrol. It seems unbelievable to you.
Imagine when a mother loses a child, or two children dying of starvation or of being killed. They didn't want to live, especially women. So they just wanted to kill themselves. They had nothing to live for.
I can't believe what happened to the Jewish people in those hospitals. Having experiments done on you, pumping petrol into you. It's horrible. However, the experiments were stopped as a new plan came into action, known as the Death March, as Rabbi Dov Karen from the Jewish Learning Exchange explains.
Realizing they were losing the war, the Nazis decided on the Death March. Jewish prisoners from the concentration camps in the east were forced to march through bitter conditions into Germany. This was number one, to try and make sure that no Jewish prisoners would be left to tell the story to the Allies. And number two, it was an attempt to bring Jewish slave labour back into Germany in a final attempt to win the war. The death marches were brutal. In terrible conditions, they were forced to march, often without shoes. Day by day, hundreds of Jews died in the snow. After the Battle of Stalingrad in 1943 and the D-Day landings in the summer 1944, the Nazis were being defeated.
In January 1945, the whole of Auschwitz was evacuated.
From the west, the American and British forces liberated camps such as Bergen-Belsen and Buchenwald. These soldiers would walk into these death camps, witnessing for the first time the horrors of the Holocaust.
We had to walk from Auschwitz to 30 kilometers to another town, which was Gleiwitz. From Auschwitz to Gleiwitz in winter, minus 15 to 20 degrees temperature, in our thin pyjamas. It was a terrible situation. So many people collapsed, and they couldn't walk anymore. On ice and snow we were walking. And as soon as somebody sat down he couldn't walk anymore, the Germans who surrounded us shot them. That was the famous Death March, because so many people even tried to evade into the woods. They were shot. And it was a terrible journey. Only half of us really arrived in Gleiwitz. Fortunately, I was one of them.
Thankfully, there are survivors of Auschwitz who can tell their testimonials and prove how they moved on from the harrowing experience. Gena Turgel tells me how she found her husband.
One day the sergeant, his name was Norman, he says that he's got a message from his commander officer to invite me for dinner to the officers' mess. And when I heard that, I thought, my God, what are they going to do with me there? I was terrified. And so I said, no, I can't do it. I was really terrified. I said, okay. So we had to be disinfected because the troops used to come in from outside. The British troops had to be disinfected, and in the evening, when they left, not to carry the epidemic outside. So we had the same treatment, and that Norman, he took me to this building, and he opened the door, and I stepped back. He says, what's the matter? Why are you stopping back? He says, look. I said to him, you must be expecting special visitors, because I've seen beautifully decorated tables with white tablecloths and flowers, which I haven't seen for 6 years. And so I said, you must be expecting a special visitor. What am I doing here? He says, you are the special visitor. This is our engagement party. I said, pardon? You must be crazy. And we walked in, and his commander officer comes over. He offers me a glass of wine, and congratulations. And then all his colleagues, so many of them, hello, congratulations. And I looked around, I saw myself, they must be crazy, because I don't know this man. And he walked over, he wanted to give me a kiss on my cheek. I pushed him away. He says, what's the matter? You are my fiancé. I said, look, you don't know me, and I don't know you. We were very happy married. Unfortunately, my husband, we would have celebrated our golden wedding, but 2 months before my husband passed away. And I've got 2 daughters and a son, and I've got 8 grandchildren, and I have got 7 great-grandchildren. And we are all very happy.
One day I met somebody and he says, you know the kids that came to England in 1945 and every Saturday night they have a dance in the church hall. Why don't you go? So one day I went, and when I opened the door, the first sentence I had, at last I found my family. After almost 70 years, they're still my family. And eventually I met a girl, she was French. We started going out together. And eventually in 1954 we got married, and I left tailoring. I went to work for my father-in-law. He was in the stationery business. And then in 1956, one of the greatest things in my life happened. You know, even liberation didn't mean, because I didn't know what liberation was. What happened then? My wife was pregnant, she went into labor, which was run by nuns, and at midnight I was there, and the nun came over to me and presented me with a little bundle. And she said, this is yours. And I went over to my wife and we both cried. And I said, at last we've got something that is ours. And today I've got 6 grandchildren, 1 great-grandson of 7 months old. And I can't tell you what a privileged life I had.
One day, a friend of mine came to me, hey, there's a girl from England, would you like to meet a girl? I said, you know, I like girls. Naturally, I like to meet her. Gave me the phone number, I phoned up that girl, and I fell in love with her over the telephone. She had a pure English accent, and we made a date. The next day, she was lovely. And we met in October 1950. I fell in love with her, and she was there. So we met in October. In November, we got engaged. And on the 31st of December 1950, we got married. And I'm still in love with my wife.
In April 1945, 60,000 Jewish people were liberated by the British Red Army. But what is the feeling now, 70 years on?
I feel I haven't got the right to forgive. God can forgive. The dead people can forgive. I haven't got the right to forgive. After all, it's quite a long time since it happened. And, well, there are many reasons. First of all, I want young people to know what can happen because of prejudice, hatred. I always say, whatever you do not hate, because 95% of the reason was purely the hatred. Hate will ruin your life. You become so bitter, you hate yourself.
I found it really hard to conceptualise what had happened to the Jewish people. Standing at a mass grave where 800 children were killed, it was hard to imagine. It was a field. It was a forest. Being in Auschwitz around the barracks, wooden sheds that could be in your garden. It's hard to imagine the horrific things that went on there. We argue with people the whole time. We always try and be better than each other, and we always think we know best. Arguments get you nowhere. Life is too short to argue. You know, children were killed age 6. Babies were killed. We're so lucky to be alive. Remember the past, honour the memory, and shape the future. Take a moment to pause. Think. Remember, 6 million Jewish people died, but we're still here today. We can shape the future. We can make a change. The Jewish nation is so strong. Don't let it stop now. Do something.